You know that moment when a room full of relatives goes silent? I walked into my parents' house holding a homemade pie and saw 23 place settings. But my spot had been removed. My mother looked straight at me and said there was no seat for disappointments. I did not cry or scream. I simply smiled and placed a thick envelope on my father's plate. Then I said the one sentence that made the entire dinner change owners. My name is Nora Cook, and I am 34 years old. Walking up the driveway of my parents' house in Ashford Glen usually feels less like a homecoming and more like entering a high-stakes courtroom where the verdict has already been decided against me. The neighborhood is one of those manicured American dreams where the grass is cut to the exact millimeter and the silence is heavy enough to crush a person. It was Thanksgiving, the fourth Thursday in November, a day that is supposed to be about gratitude and abundance. I was carrying a spiced pear and walnut pie, heavily dusted with cinnamon, in a ceramic dish that had belonged to my grandmother. I had spent 4 hours baking it that morning, measuring the ingredients with the kind of scientific precision that I hoped would finally earn a nod of approval, or at least a lack of criticism. I reached the front door. The wreath was new. It was a massive, tasteful arrangement of dried wheat and burgundy ribbons that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The air smelled of wood smoke and decaying leaves, the quintessential scent of autumn in the suburbs. But my stomach was twisting into a familiar knot. I adjusted my grip on the pie and pushed the door open. The warmth of the house hit me first, followed immediately by the noise. It was the low hum of polite conversation, the clinking of expensive crystal, and the soft jazz playlist my mother curated to impress the extended family. I stepped into the foyer, kicking off my boots. No one came to greet me. That was standard procedure. Of course, I was not the guest of honor. I was just Nora. I walked through the hallway, past the gallery wall of family photos where my face appeared significantly less often than my sister's, and turned into the dining room. My mother, Marlene Cook, had outdone herself this year. The dining room looked like a spread in a lifestyle magazine. The table was extended to its full length, covered in a gold-threaded tablecloth that shimmered under the chandelier. There were centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus running down the middle. I paused, counting the guests in my head as I scanned the room. Aunt Janine was there, Uncle Robert, the cousins from upstate, and a few neighbors who had nowhere else to go, including my immediate family. The head count was 23 people. I walked closer to the table, looking for my place card. My mother insisted on assigned seating. It was her way of controlling the flow of conversation and ensuring the right people sat next to each other. I scanned the calligraphy cards. Uncle Robert, Cousin Mike, Sloan, Dad, Mom, the pastor. I circled the table once, then I circled it again. My heart did not pound. It stopped. There were 23 sets of fine china plates, polished silverware, and crystal wine glasses, but there were only 22 chairs. I stood there, holding my lukewarm pie, feeling a coldness spread from my chest out to my fingertips. I looked at the spot where I usually sat, near the kitchen door so I could help clear the plates. The space was there, technically. The place setting was there, but the chair was gone. In its place, directly on the charger plate where my dinner should have been served, was a large, tinted card written in my mother's jagged, elegant script. I leaned in to read it. For our future legacy. I blinked. I looked around the room, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the space. My mother was standing by the sideboard, adjusting a stack of linen napkins. She was wearing a silk dress the color of champagne, her hair coiffed into a helmet of blonde perfection. She looked up and locked eyes with me. She did not smile. She did not look surprised to see me standing there, confused and humiliated. "Mom," I said. My voice sounded steady, which was a miracle. "Where is my chair?" Marlene didn't even pause in her task. She smoothed a napkin corner and looked at me as if I were a delivery driver who had arrived at the wrong address. "There is no seat for disappointments," she said. She said it so casually. She might as well have been saying there is no more salt or it is raining outside. It was a statement of fact, devoid of malice, which somehow made it infinitely worse. The room did not go silent immediately. The hum of conversation continued in the corners, but the people closest to us, Aunt Janine and a few cousins, went dead quiet. They looked at their drinks. They looked at the floor. They did anything to avoid looking at the woman whose own mother had just verbally eviscerated her in front of an audience. I stood frozen. The pie felt heavy in my arms, a ridiculous offering for a god that would never accept it. "What?" I asked, stupidly. "You heard me, Nora," my mother said, finally turning to face me fully. Her eyes were like blue glass. "We are focusing on the positive this year. We are focusing on the future. Sloan has big news. The family needs to look forward, not backward at mistakes." "I am a mistake?" I asked. "I am 34 years old. I am your daughter." "Don't start," a voice chirped from the doorway. Sloan Cook walked in. My younger sister. The golden child. She was glowing, literally and figuratively. She wore a fitted dress that accentuated her figure, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She looked radiant, successful, and completely unbothered by the tension radiating off me. "Don't make it weird, Nora," Sloan said, rolling her eyes as she picked up an appetizer. "Mom worked really hard on the theme, legacy. It's about the baby. It's about the future. Just grab a plate and eat in the kitchen or something. Seriously, don't make this about you." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, the way one might shoo a stray dog. I looked at the card again. For our future legacy, the chair had been removed to make a shrine for Sloane's unborn child. My existence, my physical presence at this table, was considered an obstruction to the celebration of Sloan. I was not just uninvited, I was erased. I looked for my father. Raymond Cook was standing by the bay window, nursing a glass of dark red wine. He was wearing the cashmere sweater I had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. He was looking out at the bare trees in the backyard, studiously ignoring the scene unfolding 10 feet away from him. "Dad?" I said. He did not turn. He took a sip of wine. I saw his shoulders tense slightly, so I knew he heard me. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew his wife had removed his eldest daughter's seat. He knew I was standing there being told I was a disappointment, and he did absolutely nothing. He just watched the gray sky as if the answers to his cowardice were written in the clouds. A heat began to rise in my neck. It wasn't the hot, frantic flash of embarrassment I was used to. This was different. This was cold. It was a glacier moving inside my chest, grinding down everything that used to be soft and yielding. For 10 years, I had apologized. I had fixed things. I had stayed quiet. I had accepted the scraps of affection they threw at me, thinking that if I just tried harder, if I was just more helpful, eventually they would look at me the way they looked at Sloan. But they never would. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was not about what I did. It was about who I was, or more accurately, who they needed me to be. They needed a disappointment to make Sloan look like a triumph. They needed a scapegoat to make themselves feel cohesive. I looked at the pie in my hands, the pear and walnut pie. I walked over to the sideboard and set it down. I did not slam it. I placed it down with deliberate, terrifying gentleness. Then I opened my purse. Inside, tucked against the lining, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The wax seal on the back had already been broken, but I had resealed it with a piece of tape. I felt the weight of it in my hand. It contained a nuclear bomb, not made of plutonium, but of paper and ink. I walked over to the head of the table, where my father's empty plate sat waiting for him. The room had gone quiet now. Everyone sensed the shift. The air pressure had changed. Marlene stopped adjusting the napkins. Sloan stopped chewing her canapé. I placed the envelope directly in the center of my father's dinner plate. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Now I get it." I turned to face the table. 22 faces stared back at me. Some were confused, some were pitying, but my mother's face was beginning to crack. A flicker of uncertainty appeared in her eyes. She knew I was usually the one who cried and ran away. She did not know this version of me. "Nora, get your things and go to the kitchen," my mother hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are embarrassing yourself." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who has nothing left to lose. "No," I said. "I don't think I will." I looked at Sloane, who was frowning, her hand still resting on her belly. I looked at the legacy card. I looked at my father's back, which was still turned to me. "Before you call me dramatic," I said, addressing the entire room, projecting my voice so even the neighbors might hear. "And before you ask me to leave so you can celebrate your perfect legacy, I want you to read what Grandma Evelyn left me." I pointed to the envelope on the plate. "She didn't just leave recipes," I said. "She left the truth." My father turned around. The glass of wine was trembling slightly in his hand. He looked at the envelope, then at me, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes for the first time in my life. He knew. Deep down, he had always known. But he had buried it under layers of denial and expensive wine. "Nora," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't. It is too late for don't," I said. "You removed my seat. You made it very clear where I stand. So now, you can stand in the truth." I looked at the audience of relatives, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. The silence was absolute. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Stay with me, because the seat was not the first thing they took. They took my history. They took my confidence, and they tried to take my name, but that envelope on the table? That was the receipt, and I was about to make them pay the bill. To understand why I burned down the bridge on Thanksgiving, you have to go back 6 months to the day the foundation started to crack. It was a Tuesday in May, the kind of day where the sky is a flat, unyielding gray sheet that threatens rain but never actually delivers it. The humidity was thick enough to curl the paper of the hymn sheets. We were at the Briar Hollow Memorial Chapel to bury my grandmother, Evelyn Hart. I arrived 45 minutes early. That was how Grandma Evelyn had raised me. She used to say that being on time was late, and being early was the only way to show respect. I had spent the night before ironing my black dress until the pleats were sharp enough to cut skin. I wanted everything to be perfect for her. I wanted to be useful. In my head, I had a mental checklist of things I could do to help. I would arrange the lilies. I would make sure the programs were straight, and I would hold my mother's hand if she cried. I walked into the chapel foyer, the smell of industrial floor cleaner warring with the scent of white roses. My mother, Marlene, was already there. She was speaking to the funeral director, a man with a face like melted wax, pointing aggressively at a flower arrangement that was apparently 2 inches too far to the left. When she saw me, her eyes did not soften. She did not look like a grieving daughter who needed comfort. She looked like a stage manager dealing with a prop that had been placed in the wrong scene. "You are here," she said, checking her watch. "Good. The greeter the funeral home provided is incompetent. I need you to stand by the double doors." I blinked, shifting my purse on my shoulder. "I thought I would go in and sit with you and Dad." I said, "I thought we could have a moment before people start arriving." Marlene smoothed the front of her black silk jacket. "There is no time for moments," she said. "I need someone to manage the flow. Make sure people sign the guest book. Make sure they take a program. And for heaven's sake, if Great Aunt Linda tries to sing, stop her." She gestured toward a podium near the entrance, where a heavy, leather-bound guest book lay open. It was the spot usually reserved for a funeral home employee, or perhaps a distant cousin who wanted to be helpful but wasn't close enough to be in the front row. I felt a small, sharp pinch in my chest, but I swallowed it down. This is how it works, I told myself. Mom is stressed. Mom grieves by organizing. I am the dependable one. I am the one who handles the logistics so everyone else can have their feelings. So, I stood by the door. For the next 40 minutes, I shook hands with strangers. I handed out glossy pamphlets with my grandmother's face on them. I nodded politely when people offered condolences to me, though half of them looked over my shoulder, scanning the room for my mother or my sister. I was the gatekeeper, the invisible mechanism that allowed the event to run smoothly. 10 minutes before the service was scheduled to start, the chapel was nearly full. The front row remained empty, reserved by velvet ropes. My parents were standing near the altar, talking in hushed tones with the minister. I closed the guest book. My feet hurt in my heels, but I walked down the center aisle, intending to take my place next to my father. I approached the velvet rope. My mother intercepted me before I could even lift the latch. "Where are you going?" she whispered. Her voice was low, but it had the cutting edge of a razor blade. "I am going to sit down," I said. "The service is starting." Marlene shook her head. "A microscopic movement. The front row is for immediate family," she said. I froze. The words hung in the air between us, suspending the dust motes. I looked at her, searching for a joke, a misunderstanding, anything that would make sense of what I had just heard. "I am immediate family." I said, "I am her granddaughter. I am your daughter." Marlene sighed, the sound of a woman whose patience was being tested by a slow child. "You know what I mean. Nora, it is for me, your father, and Sloane. We need the space. You will be more comfortable in the third row, or the back. You might need to slip out to handle the flowers afterward anyway." She turned her back on me. She simply turned around and walked away. Assuming I would obey because I had spent 34 years obeying, I stood there, my hand hovering over the velvet rope. The humiliation was a physical heat rising up my neck. It wasn't just that she wanted me to sit elsewhere. It was the definition she had just drawn in the sand. Immediate family, in her mind, that circle was a closed loop, and I was orbiting somewhere outside of it. A satellite that was useful for data transmission, but not part of the planet itself. Then the side door opened, and Sloane arrived. My sister made an entrance even at a funeral. She had flown in late from Chicago, missing the wake, missing the planning, missing the chaotic week leading up to the death where I had been the one changing Grandma's sheets and holding ice chips to her lips. Sloane wore a black dress that cost more than my car, and her sunglasses were pushed up into her perfectly blown-out hair. She looked frantic and beautiful. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Sloane whispered loudly, rushing toward the front. The traffic from the airport was a nightmare. My mother turned. Her face, which had been stone cold when looking at me, crumpled into tragedy. She opened her arms. "My baby." Marlene sobbed. "You are here. That is all that matters." She hugged Sloane. My father hugged Sloane. They ushered her past the velvet rope. They sat her in the center seat of the front row. Right between them, Sloane, who hadn't visited Grandma Evelyn in 2 years because she was too busy with her career. Sloane, who had forgotten Grandma's 90th birthday. I watched them settle in. There was a space next to my father, a space big enough for me, but he placed his hat on it. I turned around and walked to the back of the chapel. I sat in the folding chair next to the guest book, the seat reserved for the usher. I sat there alone while the organ music started, watching the backs of the 3 people who were supposed to be my world. After the service, the burial, and the reception, the emotional isolation solidified into something legal. The reading of the will did not happen in a lawyer's office with mahogany desks. It happened informally, in the living room of my parents' house, where Mr. Conrad Hale, Grandma's attorney, had come to deliver the news. He was an older man, sharp-eyed and serious, with a demeanor that suggested he had seen every variety of family dysfunction and was impressed by none of them. We sat in the living room, or rather, my parents and Sloane sat on the plush sofas. I sat on the ottoman in the corner, balancing a cup of lukewarm coffee on my knee. Marlene was anxious. She kept touching her throat. She knew Grandma Evelyn had been unpredictable in her final years. Conrad Hale put on his reading glasses. He skipped the preamble. "To my daughter, Marlene," he read, "I leave the family estate in Ashford Glen, including all furnishings and the vehicle currently in the garage." Marlene let out a breath she had been holding for decades. She looked around the room, her eyes claiming every corner, every drape, every rug. It was hers. The power was secure. To my granddaughter, Sloane, he continued, I leave my collection of vintage jewelry, currently stored in the safe deposit box at First National, as well as the sum of $50,000 to be used for her future endeavors. Sloane gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. Oh, Grandma, she murmured. That is too much. My parents beamed at her. $50,000. It was a down payment on a house. It was a safety net. It was a validation that she was the golden future of this line. Conrad Hale paused. He looked up from the paper. His eyes found me in the corner, and to my granddaughter, Nora. He read. I straightened my spine. I did not expect $50,000. I did not expect the house, but I expected something. Maybe the small cottage by the lake. Maybe her savings bonds. Maybe just an acknowledgement that I had been the one who was there. I leave my wooden recipe box and my ceramic tea set. The silence in the room was absolute. Sloane turned to look at me. Her expression was not one of pity, but of awkwardness. My mother took a sip of her tea, her face carefully blank. A recipe box, a tea set. It was almost a caricature of what you leave to the servant. The tools to serve others, the tools to keep working. I felt a stinging sensation behind my eyes, but I forced it back. I had been trained well. I had been trained to be grateful for whatever scraps fell from the table. Don't compare, I told myself. Grandma loved cooking. We cooked together. It is sentimental. It means she loved our time together. I tried to paste a smile on my face. Thank you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That means a lot. My father cleared his throat. Well, he said, his voice booming too loud in the quiet room. That is very nice, very appropriate. Nora loves to cook. It was a dismissal. It was a way of saying, let us move on. But Conrad Hale did not close his briefcase. He stood up and walked across the room. Bypassing my mother, bypassing Sloane, he came directly to me. He extended his hand. I took it, confused. His grip was firm, his skin dry and cool. Nora, he said. His voice was different now. It was not the professional monotone he had used for the others. It was personal. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Placing it in my palm, your grandmother left something else only for you, he said quietly, though in the silence of the room, everyone heard it. My mother's head snapped up. What? She demanded. There was nothing else in the document. It is not in the general will. Marlene, Conrad said. Not looking at her, he kept his eyes on me. It is a separate trust arrangement, but it cannot be released yet. Why not? Sloane asked, her voice sharp with sudden jealousy. There is a time condition, Conrad said. 6 months. The assets and the accompanying documents are sealed until the 6-month anniversary of her passing. He looked at me with an intensity that made me shiver. She wanted you to have time to grieve, Nora, and perhaps she wanted time to let things settle. He pressed the card into my hand. Call me in 6 months. On the dot. Do not be late. I nodded, clutching the card like a lifeline. I did not know what it meant. Maybe it was another $1,000. Maybe it was a letter. But the fact that it was separate, that it was hidden from my mother, sent a jolt of electricity through the room. Conrad Hale left shortly after. The atmosphere in the living room had shifted. The celebration of Sloane's $50,000 and Marlene's new house had been tainted by the mystery of my 6-month delay. My mother stood up. She walked over to where I was sitting. She looked down at me. It isn't fair to get your hopes up, she said. Her voice was cold, practical. Grandma was on a lot of medication at the end. She likely forgot to sign something, or it is just some sentimental trinkets she wanted stored. Don't go thinking you won the lottery. I looked up at her. For the first time, I really looked at her. I saw the way her eyes narrowed when she looked at me. It wasn't just annoyance. It wasn't just disappointment. It was fear. She looked at me not like a daughter, but like a stain on a white carpet. A stain she had tried to scrub out, tried to cover with furniture, but that kept bleeding through. She looked at me like I was evidence of a crime she had committed a long time ago. I stood up, clutching the recipe box I'd been given, the box that smelled of vanilla and old paper. I won't get my hopes up. Mom, I said, but as I walked out of that house, leaving them to celebrate their inheritance, I knew one thing. The 6-month clock had started ticking. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just waiting to be told what to do. I was waiting to find out who I was. That was 6 months ago. Since that day, I had been a ghost in my own family. I watched them plan renovations for the house. I watched Sloan shop for new cars. I continued to work my administrative job. I continued to live in my small apartment, and I continued to show up for Sunday dinners where I was ignored. But I kept the card, and I kept the date. And when I walked into that Thanksgiving dinner and saw my chair gone, saw that my mother had finally decided to physicalize the erasure she had started at the funeral, I knew the time for waiting was over. The recipe box wasn't just recipes, and the delay wasn't just about grief. Grandma Evelyn knew. She knew that if she gave me the truth while I was still desperate for their love, I would have burned it to keep them warm. She had to wait until I was cold enough to use the fire for myself. Standing there at the Thanksgiving table, with the envelope on my father's plate, I looked at Marlene. I remembered the funeral. I remembered the immediate family rope. You wanted the front row. Mom, I thought, well, you have got it. You have the best seat in the house for what happens next. The envelope had weight in the dining room when I placed that envelope on my father's plate. You have to understand the noise of the last 10 years. You have to understand how a person gets slowly, methodically erased until they are nothing more than a smudge on the family portrait. It does not happen overnight. It happens in 1,000 small decisions, 1,000 quiet concessions that strip away your edges until you fit into the box they have built for you. 10 years ago, I was 24 years old. I was not the bitter, silent woman standing in the Thanksgiving dining room. I was hopeful. I was working part-time at a bookstore in the city, smelling of paper and coffee, and I was 3 semesters away from finishing my degree in business management. I had a 5-year plan. I had a vision of myself in a tailored suit, managing a logistics company, maybe even owning one someday. I had a boyfriend named Mark who made me laugh and told me I was smarter than I gave myself credit for. Then my mother got sick. It was not a sudden, tragic accident that rallied the community. It was a complex, dragging autoimmune condition that required specialists, long drives to the state capitol, and a sterile mountain of insurance paperwork. It was the kind of illness that eats a family's time and energy like a slow leak in a tire. We held a family meeting at the kitchen table. I remember the light coming through the blinds, striping the oak table where my textbooks were stacked. My father sat at the head, rubbing his temples. Sloan was there, 19 years old, fresh out of her first year of university, looking tanned and vibrant, wearing a sweatshirt with her sorority letters stitched across the chest. We have a problem. My father said, his voice was heavy. Your mother needs round-the-clock care for the next 6 months, maybe a year. She cannot drive. She needs help with bathing, with meals, with the therapy appointments. I cannot quit my job. We need the insurance. He looked at Sloan. Then he looked at me. The silence that followed was the first brick in the wall that would eventually separate me from my own life. Sloan cannot take a leave of absence, my mother said from the living room couch, her voice weak but decisive. She is on the dean's list. If she stops now, she will lose her scholarship. She will lose her momentum. We cannot ask her to sacrifice her future. The word future hung in the air, shiny and protected. Sloan's future was a fragile, precious thing that had to be guarded at all costs. Then they turned to me. Nora. My father said, you are just taking classes at the community college. It is not the same pressure. You could pause, just for a semester, just until we get over the hump. I looked at my textbooks. I looked at the syllabus I had just highlighted. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say that my momentum mattered too, that my degree was not a hobby, that I had worked double shifts to pay for those credits. But I was Nora. I was the easy one. I was the one who never caused a scene. I was the one who had been trained to smooth over the rough edges of the family. Okay, I said. I felt a small stone drop in my stomach. I can take a semester off. It was not a semester. It was 2 years. For 730 days, I ceased to be a young woman with a life. I became a nurse, a chauffeur, a housekeeper, and a secretary. My world shrank to the 4 walls of my parents' house and the sterile corridors of the teaching hospital 3 hours away. I woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare my mother's special dietary meals. I drove her to infusions that lasted 4 hours, sitting in uncomfortable chairs reading old magazines while she slept. I fought on the phone with insurance adjusters who tried to deny coverage for her medication, learning the intricate language of medical coding and bureaucracy. I cleaned the house because my father was too tired when he got home. I did the laundry. I grocery shopped. Mark, my boyfriend, stopped calling after the 3rd time I had to cancel a date because Mom needed me to rub her feet, or because Dad couldn't figure out the microwave. I didn't blame him. I had become a ghost in my own relationship. No one ever called it a sacrifice. That is the thing about being the scapegoat. Your pain is invisible. When neighbors brought casseroles, they would coo over Sloan when she came home for weekends. "Look at you. Sloan," Mrs. Higgins would say, "getting straight A's. You are making the family so proud." Then she would turn to me, holding a tray of dirty dishes. "And Nora, you are such a help. Such a good girl to stay home and help your mother." Help, as if I were a volunteer. As if I didn't have a tuition bill I was ignoring. As if I didn't cry in the shower every morning for 10 minutes, just to let the pressure out before I put on my brave face. It was not love. It was duty. And duty is a heavy, cold thing to carry when no one acknowledges the weight. Sloan would come home for holidays, dumping her laundry bag in the hallway for me to wash. She would tell stories about frat parties, about her internships, about the trips she took with her friends to Cabo and New York. My parents would listen, rapt, their faces glowing with pride. "That is wonderful. Honey," my father would say, "you are really living life." I would be in the kitchen, scraping plates, listening to the life I wasn't allowed to have. I felt a bitterness growing in my chest, a dark root taking hold. Why was her time worth more than mine? Why was her youth protected while mine was spent sorting pill bottles? When my mother finally went into remission, 2 years later, I thought my sentence was served. The doctor said she was stable. She could drive again. She could cook. I went to my father in his study one evening. I had the re-enrollment papers for the college in my hand. They were wrinkled because I had been holding them so tight. "Dad," I said, "Mom is better. I want to go back to school next month. I need to pay the registration fee." My father didn't look up from his laptop. He was typing an email. "Now?" he asked, distraction in his voice. "Yes," I said. "I have been out for 2 years. I need to finish." He stopped typing and spun his chair around. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a mixture of pity and impatience. "Nora," he said, "you are 26. You have been out of the loop for a long time. The credits might not even transfer anymore." "They do," I said quickly. I checked. He sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Look, money is tight right now. The medical bills were substantial. And we are paying for Sloan's grad school applications. She has a real shot at an MBA program in Chicago." I felt the air leave the room. "So you are saying there is no money for me?" I asked. "I am saying, what is the point?" My father said. His voice was not cruel, just practical, brutally, devastatingly practical. "You are behind. Nora, you have lost the rhythm of school. You are good at managing the house. You have a job at the bookstore. Why stress yourself out trying to chase something that maybe isn't for you? Isn't for you." He was telling me that ambition wasn't for me, that success wasn't for me, that my role was to support the people who actually mattered. I walked out of his study without saying a word. I went to my room and tore the enrollment papers into tiny, jagged confetti. I threw them in the trash can. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling the hope drain out of me like water from a cracked jar. I became the logistics person. I became the aunt who wasn't an aunt yet, the sister who was really a servant. I stayed at the bookstore. I moved into a small, cheap apartment, but I was over at my parents' house 4 times a week to help with things they could easily do themselves. It was during this time that Grandma Evelyn started watching me. She didn't come over often. She and my mother had a strained relationship. But when she did, she sat in the corner of the kitchen while I cooked. She had sharp eyes. Grandma Evelyn, eyes that saw things people tried to hide. One Sunday, about a year after I'd given up on school, I was peeling potatoes at the sink. Sloane was in the living room, showing everyone photos from her graduation trip to Europe. Laughter floated into the kitchen. Look at the Eiffel Tower. Look at this wine bar. I was digging the eyes out of a potato, scrubbing it violently. Grandma Evelyn walked up beside me. She didn't offer to help. She knew I didn't want help. She just leaned against the counter and watched my hands. "You are angry," she said softly. I froze. I didn't look at her. "I am not angry. Grandma, I am just peeling potatoes." "You are angry," she repeated. "And you should be." She reached out and placed her hand over mine, stopping the peeler. Her skin was paper thin, warm and dry. "Nora," she whispered. The volume was low, so the people in the living room wouldn't hear, but the intensity was like a shout. "Your mother is punishing the wrong person." I turned to look at her then. "What?" I asked. "Punishing me for what? I did everything right. I stayed. I helped. I know," she said. "That is not what I mean. She is not punishing you for what you did. She is punishing you for who you are, or rather, for who she thinks you are." I didn't understand. I shook my head. "I don't get it." Grandma Evelyn looked toward the living room, where my mother was laughing a little too loudly at one of Sloane's stories. Her expression was sad, deeply sad. "Sometimes," she said, "people cannot face their own mistakes, so they put them on someone else. They make someone else carry the shame so they don't have to look at it. You are carrying a bag of rocks that isn't yours. Nora," she squeezed my hand, "don't let them convince you that you deserve the weight." She walked away before I could ask her what she meant. I didn't understand her then. I thought she was just being cryptic, or maybe senile, punishing the wrong person. It didn't make sense. I was her daughter. Why would she punish me? But the words stuck in my mind like a splinter, a thorn under the skin that you can't see but you feel every time you move. For the next few years, every time my mother criticized my clothes, every time my father forgot my birthday, every time Sloane treated me like a hired assistant, I heard Grandma's voice. "You are carrying a bag of rocks that isn't yours." I didn't know what the rocks were. I didn't know what the mistake was. I only knew that I felt guilty all the time. I felt like I had to apologize for taking up space. I felt like I was a debt that the family had been forced to incur, and I had to spend the rest of my life paying it back with interest. I didn't know that the debt was a lie. I didn't know that the reason I was the scapegoat wasn't because I was less smart, or less driven, or less worthy than Sloane. I was the scapegoat because I was the evidence, and 10 years later, standing in that dining room with the truth in an envelope. I finally understood what Grandma Evelyn meant. They weren't punishing me for being a bad daughter. They were punishing me for not being his daughter. But back then, peeling potatoes in the sink while my sister showed off photos of Paris, I just felt small. I felt like I had missed the boat, and I was left standing on the dock, waving at the people who were sailing away with my life. And the worst part? I thought I deserved it. It was exactly 6 months to the day since the funeral. I knew this because I had marked the date on the calendar in my kitchen. A large red circle around November 21st. I expected I would have to call him. I expected I would have to chase down Mr. Conrad Hale. The way I had to chase down everything else in my life. My father's attention, my mother's approval, a fair wage, a return text message. I was used to being the pursuer, the one who cared more, the one who had to remind people that I existed. But I was wrong. At 9 o'clock in the morning, while I was rinsing my coffee mug in the sink of my apartment, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I did not recognize, but I knew who it was immediately. Miss Cook. His voice was dry and precise, like the rustling of parchment. "It is Conrad Hale. The waiting period has concluded. I have the package your grandmother instructed me to deliver. My heart did a strange, acrobatic flip in my chest. I asked him if I needed to come to his office. No, he said, I am actually in your area. Your grandmother was quite specific about the delivery. She did not want you to have to come to a law office. She wanted you to receive this in your own space, on your own terms. I can be at your apartment in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I spent those 20 minutes pacing the length of my living room. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom walk-up on the edge of town that smelled perpetually of the bakery downstairs. It was clean, but it was modest. The furniture was second-hand. The rugs were from discount stores, and the walls were bare because I could not afford art. I looked around, wondering what a high-powered attorney would think of my life. Then I stopped. I realized I was doing it again, looking at myself through someone else's eyes, judging my worth based on their perception. When the buzzer rang, I smoothed my sweater and buzzed him up. Conrad Hale looked out of place in my narrow hallway. He wore a charcoal wool coat and held a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car. He did not come in for tea. He did not make small talk about the weather or the holidays. He simply unlocked his briefcase and withdrew a single, thick envelope. It was creamy, heavy paper, the kind they do not make anymore. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with a generic floral emblem. On the front, written in my grandmother's shaky but defiant cursive, were words that made the breath catch in my throat. For Nora, when you are ready to stop begging. I stared at the sentence. It felt like a slap and a hug at the same time. When you are ready to stop begging. She had seen it. She had seen me begging for love, begging for a seat at the table, begging to be included in the immediate family. She had seen the pathetic nature of my devotion to people who treated me like furniture. I took the envelope. It was heavy, not just physically heavy, but spiritually dense. It felt radioactive. Good luck. Nora, Conrad said. He looked at me for a long moment, and his expression softened. I think you will find that Evelyn was a woman of immense foresight. Then he left. I locked the door and leaned against it, clutching the envelope to my chest. I should have opened it right then. I should have torn through the wax and devoured the secret, but I was terrified. I carried it into my bedroom and put it in the top drawer of my nightstand, underneath a stack of winter socks. I shut the drawer. I walked into the kitchen. I washed a spoon. I watered my spider plant. I did 3 loads of laundry. I was paralyzed by the fear that the secret inside was something terrible about me. What if Grandma Evelyn was writing to tell me that I really was a disappointment? What if she was confirming that I was unlovable, that there was something broken in my genetic code that made me unworthy of the seat my mother had taken away? The mind of a scapegoat is a cruel place. It turns every unknown into an indictment. I left the envelope in the drawer for 2 days. It sat there like a hot coal, burning through the wood. Finally, on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I couldn't take it anymore. It was 2 a.m. The wind was howling outside, rattling the single-pane windows of my apartment. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the edge of my bed. I opened the drawer. I took out the envelope. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. The red wax cracked with a sharp snap. I reached inside and pulled out the contents. There were 4 things. A handwritten letter on 3 sheets of legal pad paper, a laboratory report from a genetics center in St. Louis, a photocopy of a birth certificate with several lines blacked out, and a stapled legal document titled, The Evelyn Hart Educational Trust. I started with the letter, My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have survived 6 months without me. I hope, in those 6 months, you have started to see your family clearly. I hope you have stopped trying to buy their love with your labor. But knowing you, and knowing how big your heart is, you are probably still trying. I have to tell you the truth. Nora, I have to tell you the thing that has poisoned this family for 34 years. I kept this secret because your mother begged me to. She came to me, weeping, terrified that her life would fall apart, that her marriage would end, that she would be ruined. I let her silence me because I thought I was protecting the family unit, but I was wrong. By protecting the marriage, I sacrificed the child. I watched them chip away at you. Nora, I watched them treat you like a penance they had to pay, and I realized that they weren't punishing you for anything you did. They were punishing you because every time they looked at you, they saw the lie. I stopped reading. The room felt suddenly very cold. The lie. I picked up the laboratory report. It was dated 35 years ago. It was a paternity test. The names listed were Marlene Cook, child, female, and Raymond Cook. I scanned the columns of numbers, the genetic markers that meant nothing to me, until my eyes landed on the summary at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 0%. Conclusion: Raymond Cook is excluded as the biological father of the child. I stopped breathing. The paper shook in my hands, making a dry, rattling sound. Raymond Cook was not my father. I read it again. 0%. Not a low chance. No chance. I dropped the paper on the bedspread and picked up the letter again, my eyes racing to find the explanation. Your father, Raymond, knows. Grandma wrote, he has known since you were 3 years old. He found a letter Marlene had hidden. It nearly destroyed them, but they made a deal. They decided to stay together for the sake of appearances, for the sake of their reputation in the church and the community. Raymond agreed to raise you, but on the condition that they never spoke of it again. But Raymond is a weak man. Nora, he couldn't send you away, but he couldn't love you either. To him, you were the living proof of Marlene's betrayal, and Marlene, your mother, she couldn't forgive you for being the evidence of her sin. She resented you because you forced her to stay in a marriage where she had lost the upper hand. Then, when Sloane was born, Raymond's true daughter, they finally had the clean child they wanted, the child who didn't remind them of the cracks in the foundation. I put the letter down. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. My entire life replayed in my head in a split second. The way my father never looked me in the eye. It wasn't because I wasn't smart enough. It was because I didn't have his eyes. The way my mother scrutinized me, controlled me, tried to hide me in the back row of photos. It wasn't because I was awkward. It was because I was the affair. I was the mistake. No seat for disappointments, she had said. She wasn't talking about my career or my life choices. She was talking about my conception. I was the disappointment. I was the error. A strange sound escaped my throat. It was a laugh, a jagged, broken laugh. All those years I thought I just needed to try harder. I thought if I baked better pies, if I got better grades, if I scrubbed the floors cleaner, they would finally love me. But it was rigged. The game was rigged from the moment I was born. I could have been the President of the United States, and it wouldn't have mattered, to them. I was just a walking, breathing reminder of infidelity. I went back to the bed and picked up the legal document, the Evelyn Hart Educational Trust. I skimmed the legalese. Grandma had liquidated a significant portion of her private stocks, money my mother didn't know existed, and put it into an irrevocable trust. Beneficiary: Nora Cook. Purpose: for the pursuit of higher education, housing, and personal advancement. Clause 4. Under no circumstances shall Marlene Cook or Raymond Cook have access to, control over, or knowledge of the disbursement of these funds. It was enough money to finish my degree. It was enough money to get a master's. It was enough money to buy a house where I didn't have to listen to the neighbors through the wall. Grandma had given me an exit strategy. She had given me a sword and a shield. I looked at the last item in the pile. The photocopy of the birth certificate. The father's name was blacked out with heavy marker, but I could see the faint impression of handwriting underneath, and clipped to it was a small, torn corner of a photograph. It showed only a man's hand, resting on the steering wheel of a car, a vintage car. On the pinky finger of the hand was a silver ring with a distinct design, 2 crossed arrows. I turned back to the letter for the final paragraph. I tried to find him. Nora. His name is hidden in the city records, but Marlene covered her tracks well. All I found was a name, E.S., and this scrap of a photo I found in her old diary. I don't know if he is a good man. I don't know if he knows you exist, but I know that you deserve to know that you come from somewhere. You are not just a mistake. You are a person. Don't let them take your seat anymore. Build your own table. Love, Grandma. I sat there until the sun came up. The anger didn't come all at once. It seeped in slowly, like cold water rising in a basement. It started in my toes and worked its way up until I felt like I was vibrating with it. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner that was 2 days away. I thought about the text my mother had sent me earlier that day. Dinner is at 6. Arrive early. Bring something. I looked at the DNA test. I looked at the trust fund. I wasn't going to go to that dinner to eat turkey. I wasn't going to go to make peace. I had spent my whole life wondering why I didn't fit in that house. Now I knew. I didn't fit because I was a cuckoo bird in a nest of sparrows. And for 34 years, they had plucked my feathers to keep me from flying, all while blaming me for not having wings. I took the original documents and placed them inside a fireproof lockbox I kept in my closet. Then, I drove to the copy shop down the street. I made copies. High resolution, color copies. I put one set of copies in a fresh envelope. A thick cream-colored envelope, just like the one Grandma had used. I drove back to my apartment. I showered. I dressed. I went to work. But I was different. The Nora who walked into the office that Wednesday was not the Nora who had walked out on Tuesday. My coworkers didn't notice. But I felt it. The desperation was gone. The neediness was gone. The begging was over. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror at work. I looked for him. E.S. Did I have his nose? Did I have his chin? I didn't know. But I knew I didn't have Raymond Cook's weakness. And I didn't have Marlene Cook's cruelty. I had Grandma Evelyn's fire. Thanksgiving was coming. And for the first time in history, I was bringing the main course. I wasn't going to bring a pie to apologize for my existence. I was going to bring the truth. I would go to their house. I would walk into their perfect dining room. And if they tried to erase me again, if they tried to push me to the kids' table or the kitchen or out the door, I would burn the facade to the ground. I patted the envelope in my purse. When you are ready to stop begging, I was ready. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving is statistically the busiest travel day of the year. But for me, it was the day the silence became deafening. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, staring at my phone, willing it to ring with a different tone. I wanted a conversation. I wanted a check-in. I wanted my mother to call and ask how I was doing, or maybe ask if I needed help with the baking, or perhaps just to hear my voice. When the phone finally lit up at 2 p.m, it was her, Marlene. I picked it up on the second ring. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. "Dinner is at 6 o'clock, she said. There was no greeting, no hello, no warmth. Her voice was clipped, efficient, the voice of a general mobilizing troops rather than a mother inviting her daughter home. "I know. Mom," I said, "I will be there. Arrive early," she continued, talking over me. "The traffic will be terrible, and I need the driveway clear for the caterers before the guests arrive. Park on the street, and bring something, a dessert, but nothing that needs the oven. My oven will be full." I looked at the counter where I had already laid out the ingredients for the spiced pear and walnut pie. I had chosen it because it was Grandma Evelyn's favorite. "I am making the pear pie," I said. "It is already baked. I just need to—" "Fine," she interrupted. "Just make sure it is presentable. Sloan is bringing a tart from that French bakery in the city, so the bar is high." There was a pause, a small, hollow space where a normal parent might say, "I love you," or "I can't wait to see you." I waited for it. I held my breath, giving her the space to be a mother. "Do not be late," she said. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Park on the street. The bar is high. Do not be late. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I was a vendor who hadn't been paid. I needed a distraction. So I made the mistake of opening social media. My feed was flooded with Thanksgiving prep photos, friends posting pictures of turkeys brining, airports crowded with travelers, heartfelt captions about being thankful for health and home. And then, there it was. Sloane's post. It had been up for only 20 minutes, and it already had over 200 likes. It was a professionally staged photo. Sloane and her husband, Brad, were standing in a field of golden wheat, bathed in the soft glow of magic hour sunlight. Brad had his hand on Sloane's stomach. Sloane was holding a pair of tiny white baby shoes. The caption read, "Our greatest blessing is arriving this spring. We are so excited to expand our family and share the news." With hashtags about new chapter and future legacy, I stared at the hashtag, future legacy. I scrolled down to the comments. It was a waterfall of praise, a digital ticker tape parade. "Oh my God. Congrats. You will be the best mom. Finally. The news we have been waiting for. Marlene must be over the moon." And then I saw a comment from my Aunt Linda. "So happy for you. Sloane, you are truly the pride of this family. A perfect next step for a perfect couple. The pride of this family." I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and cold. It wasn't that I was jealous of the baby. I wasn't. I was happy for the existence of a new life. But the phrasing, the pride of the family, implied that there was a singular position for pride. And it was occupied. It implied that the rest of us were just footnotes. I scrolled further. I looked for my name. I looked for a comment from my mother saying, "My girls are my world." There was nothing. My mother had commented, "My heart is so full. The legacy continues." I turned off my phone. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked tired. I looked like a woman who had spent 34 years knocking on a door that was locked from the inside. The legacy continues. That was it. That was the theme. I was not part of the legacy. I was the interruption in the bloodline. I was the glitch they had patched over. I stood up. The sadness that usually paralyzed me was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out the fireproof lockbox. I keyed in the code. Inside lay the originals, the DNA test, the letter from Grandma Evelyn, the trust documents, and the torn photograph of the man with the arrow ring. I took them out. I handled them with reverence. These weren't just papers. They were my emancipation proclamation. I put them in a sturdy tote bag and drove to the copy center 3 blocks away. I didn't trust the scanner at work. I didn't want any digital footprint on a company server. At the shop, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I stood at the machine, feeding the pages through one by one. The light scanned back and forth, illuminating the truth in bright, blinding flashes. Probability of paternity, 0%. Flash, stop begging. Flash, the Evelyn Hart Educational Trust. Flash, I made 3 sets of copies. 1 set I would leave in the lockbox with the originals. 1 set I would mail to a P.O. box I had rented yesterday, just in case something happened to my apartment. And the third set I placed into a thick, cream-colored envelope. I sealed it. I didn't use wax this time. I used heavy-duty tape. I wanted it to be accessible, but secure. I drove home, feeling the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. It felt heavy, like a loaded gun. On the way back, I stopped at the grocery store. I needed heavy cream for the whipped topping for the pie. The store was a chaotic crush of last-minute shoppers fighting over canned pumpkin and dinner rolls. I navigated the aisles with my cart, keeping my head down, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone I knew from high school. Nora? I froze in the dairy aisle, my hand reaching for a carton of cream. I turned around. It was Aunt Janine, my mother's younger sister. Janine was the rebel of the family, which in the Cook clan meant she wore tie-dye occasionally and had divorced her first husband. She had always been kind to me, but distant, kept at arm's length by my mother's aggressive gatekeeping. "Oh, hi, Aunt Janine," I said, forcing a smile. She looked at me. She didn't do the usual scan of my outfit or my hair. She looked right into my eyes. She looked tired, too. Her cart was full of wine bottles. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked. Her voice was lower than necessary, intimate amidst the clatter of shopping carts. I shrugged. As ready as I can be. I am bringing a pie. Janine stepped closer. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. I saw the post, she said. About Sloan. Yeah, I said. Great news. Janine didn't smile. Marlene has been calling everyone for 3 days. She is planning some big toast. She is calling it the legacy dinner. I felt my stomach tighten. I know. I saw the hashtag. Janine reached out and touched my arm. Her fingers were cold. Nora, listen to me. I know. I know things are hard with your mom. I know you feel like you are on the outside looking in. I looked at the floor. That is one way to put it. Janine squeezed my arm. Grandma Evelyn worried about you. You know, before she passed. She used to talk to me about you. My head snapped up. She did? Yes. She told me once. Don't let Marlene write Nora's life. She said Marlene has a way of erasing things she doesn't like. And she was terrified you would let yourself be erased. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back furiously. I am not going to be erased. Aunt Janine, good, she said fiercely. She looked at me with a strange intensity. Because you are more like Evelyn than any of them. You have her spine. You just haven't used it yet. She let go of my arm. Then, as if she hadn't just delivered a profound emotional decree, she grabbed a block of cheddar cheese from the shelf. I will see you tomorrow. Honey, keep your chin up, and maybe wear armor. I watched her walk away toward the checkout line. Wear armor. I drove home in silence. Back in my apartment, I baked the pie. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the small space, a scent that usually brought me comfort. But today, it felt like war paint. I was preparing a weapon. I sat at the kitchen table with the cooling pie in front of me and the envelope in my lap. I had a choice to make, a terrible, heavy choice. I could walk into that dinner tomorrow and drop the envelope on the table immediately. I could blow up the family before the appetizers were even served. I could scream. I could cry. I could demand the years back that they had stolen, but that felt messy. That felt like the old Nora, the one who reacted, the one who was emotional. If I did that, they would call me crazy. They would say I was jealous of Sloane's baby. They would spin the narrative, just like they always did. Nora is having a breakdown. Poor Nora. No, I needed a rule of engagement. I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope. I would go to the dinner. I would bring my pie. I would be polite. I would congratulate Sloane. I would give my father a hug. I would give them every single opportunity to treat me with basic human decency. If they gave me a seat at the table, literally and metaphorically, I would leave the envelope in my purse. I would keep the secret. I would walk away and build my own life quietly, using the trust fund to escape without burning the house down. I would be the bigger person. But if they treated me like a ghost again, if they made me feel small, if they erased me, then I would show them exactly who I was. I set the rule in my mind like pouring concrete. I will only use this if they take my seat. It was a test I desperately wanted them to pass, but was terrified they would fail. The sun went down. The apartment grew dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the glow of the street lamps coming through the window. I started to rehearse. Not a speech, but a defense. I needed to be ready to speak without my voice shaking. I needed to be ready to stand up without my knees knocking together. Happy Thanksgiving, I whispered to the empty room. Pass the potatoes, please. I am not a disappointment. My voice sounded small in the empty kitchen. I cleared my throat. I sat up straighter. I channeled the woman Grandma Evelyn believed I was. I channeled the woman who had 0% of Raymond Cook's DNA. I am not a disappointment, I said again, louder this time. My name is Nora, and I belong at this table. The words hung in the air. I looked at the clock. It was 9 o'clock. In 21 hours, I would be walking up the driveway in Ashford Glen. I stood up and walked to the closet. I picked out my outfit for tomorrow. A dark green dress, high heels, not the sensible flats I usually wore to be helpful and run back and forth to the kitchen. No, tomorrow I would wear heels. I would be tall. I put the envelope in my purse. I checked the clasp. I went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the wind, feeling the timeline of my life converging on a single point. The girl who begged for love was dying. Tomorrow, a woman would walk into that house. I just didn't know yet if she would walk out as a daughter or as a stranger. But one way or another, the begging stopped tomorrow. I pulled my car up to the curb of my parents' house at exactly 5:45. I parked on the street, just as I had been instructed, leaving the pristine concrete driveway empty for the more important guests. The house looked like a movie set. The windows were glowing with warm, amber light, and the landscaping was so precise it looked artificial. The bushes trimmed into submission. A wreath the size of a tractor tire hung on the front door, adorned with gold ribbons that shimmered under the porch light. It was a picture of suburban perfection. The kind of house where nothing bad ever happened, where voices were never raised, and where families loved each other unconditionally. I grabbed the tote bag containing the pie from the passenger seat. My purse, heavy with the envelope, was slung over my shoulder. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. My lipstick was red, a shade darker than I usually wore. My dress was green silk. I looked like a woman who was going to a party, not a woman who was walking into a firing squad. I walked up the path, the sound of my heels clicking on the stone pavers echoing in the cold November air. I didn't knock. I had a key, though I rarely used it anymore. I unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me first. It was not the smell of roasting turkey and sage. It was the smell of expensive candles, sandalwood and vanilla, masking the scent of food. My mother didn't like her house to smell like effort. She wanted the food to appear magically, without the vulgar evidence of cooking. Move that vase to the left. No, the other left. My mother's voice drifted from the dining room. I walked in. Marlene Cook was standing at the head of the table, directing two servers from the catering company. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress that looked soft, but was likely structured with industrial-strength shapewear. She looked impeccable. She also looked manic. "Nora," she said without turning around, sensing my presence like a disturbance in the force field. "You are early. Good. Take these coats to the guest room." She pointed to a pile of coats on the entryway bench that belonged to the early arrivals, Aunt Janine and Uncle Robert. I stood my ground. "Hello, Mom. Happy Thanksgiving." She turned then, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a critical assessment of my presentation. "That green is a bit dark for the season," she noted, "but at least you are dressed. The coats, Nora." "I will get the coats in a minute," I said, my voice steady. "I brought the pie." I held up the tote bag. Marlene waved a hand dismissively. "Put it in the kitchen, somewhere out of the way. The caterers need the counter space." I walked past her into the dining room. The table was breathtaking. It was set for 22 people. The china was the wedding set she only brought out for major life events. The crystal water goblets caught the light from the chandelier and threw rainbows across the white tablecloth. Down the center of the table ran a runner of eucalyptus and white pumpkins, interspersed with gold votive candles. It was beautiful. It was cold. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the table, reading the place cards. They were written in calligraphy, black ink on heavy cardstock. Sloan, Brad, Aunt Janine, Uncle Robert, Cousin Mike, the pastor. I circled the table. I looked for Nora. I found my father's spot at the head of the table. I found my mother's spot at the other end. I found a spot for the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who always drank too much sherry. I reached the end of the table near the swinging kitchen door. This was usually my spot, the helper spot, but there was no card for me, and there was no chair. Where my chair usually sat, there was a gap. The table setting was there, the plate, the fork, the knife, but the space where a human being should sit was occupied by a large, decorative card on a stand. "For our future legacy." I stared at it. The words seemed to vibrate. "For our future legacy." My mother had come up behind me. She was adjusting a fork, turning it 2 millimeters to the right. "Mom," I said, Where am I sitting? She didn't look up. We are tight on space this year. Nora, with the baby announcement, and Sloane's in-laws coming, and the pastor, we just ran out of room at the main table. There are 23 people, I said. I counted the coats. There are 23 of us. Yes, she said breezily, and 22 seats. It is just math, dear. So where do I sit? I asked again. She finally looked at me, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if I were asking a ridiculous question. You will eat later in the kitchen. Adults first. Adults first. I was 34 years old. I paid my own rent. I paid my own taxes. I had a 401k. But in this house, I was not an adult. I was a child who had been held back a grade, indefinitely suspended in a state of adolescence. You want me to stand in the kitchen while you eat? I asked. Don't be dramatic, she snapped. You can help the caterers. Keep the water pitchers full. It will give you something to do. You know how awkward you get when you have to make conversation with strangers. She turned back to the servers. Make sure the wine is poured before the toast. I don't want any delays. I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just an insult. It was a demotion. She wasn't just telling me I wasn't family. She was telling me I was staff. I walked into the kitchen. It was bustling with 3 caterers in black uniforms plating salads. They looked at me, then looked away, assuming I was just another guest getting lost. I placed Grandma Evelyn's pie on a cluttered counter in the corner, next to a stack of dirty trays. It looked small and pathetic in its ceramic dish. Overshadowed by the tower of professional pastries the caterers were unpacking, I needed to find my father. I walked out the back door into the sunroom. My father, Raymond, was standing there, staring out at the dark backyard. He was holding a glass of scotch, the ice cubes melting. Dad, I said. He jumped slightly, spilling a drop of amber liquid on his hand. He turned to face me. He looked tired. His eyes, usually kind but evasive, darted to the side, avoiding mine. Nora, he said. You are here. Mom took my seat, I said. I didn't sugarcoat it. She removed my chair from the table. She wants me to eat in the kitchen. My father sighed. It was a long, rattling sound deep in his chest. He took a sip of his drink. Your mother wanted everything perfect for Sloane, he said. You know how she gets. And you let her? I asked. You let her kick your daughter off the table? He looked at his shoes. It is just for one night. Nora, just keep the peace, please. For me? For me. He was asking me to accept humiliation, so he wouldn't have to have an uncomfortable conversation with his wife. He was trading my dignity for his quiet evening. I have kept the peace for 34 years, I said softly. I know, he said, and he sounded genuinely sad. And you are good at it. You are the strong one. Nora, Sloane. She needs the spotlight. You don't. He patted my shoulder awkwardly and walked past me. Back into the house. He chose the scotch. He chose the silence. I stayed in the sunroom for a moment, breathing in the cold air coming off the glass. You are the strong one. That was the lie they told to make themselves feel better about neglecting the one who actually carried the load. When I walked back into the living room, the party was in full swing. Sloane had arrived. My sister was holding court in the center of the room. She was wearing a cream dress that matched the decor, her hand resting protectively on her small baby bump. Her husband, Brad, was by her side, looking handsome and vacant, nodding at everything she said. Nora! Sloane called out when she saw me. The room quieted slightly. Sloane walked over to me, her movements graceful and fluid. She hugged me, but it was one of those air hugs where bodies don't actually touch. Just a brush of cheeks. I am so glad you made it, she said, her voice pitched high for the audience. Mom was worried you wouldn't come. You know how you get about crowds. I am fine with crowds, I said. Sloane laughed, a tinkling sound. Oh, you know what I mean. You are so internal. She turned to the group of relatives standing nearby. Nora is the dependable one, always there in the background, making sure the wheels turn. I don't know what we would do without her. It sounded like a compliment. It was meant to sound like a compliment, but it was a label. The background, the wheels, not the driver, not the passenger, the mechanic. "Congratulations on the baby," I said. "Thank you." Sloane beamed. "We are naming him after Dad. Raymond, isn't that sweet?" I felt a flash of nausea. A baby named after a man who couldn't even look his own daughter in the eye. "That is fitting," I said. Sloane drifted away to greet a cousin. Leaving me standing alone near the fireplace, I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a tray. Needing something to do with my hands, I moved toward the corner of the room, near the bookshelf. Trying to blend into the wallpaper, two of my aunts, Linda and Sarah, were standing near the punch bowl. Their backs to me. They didn't see me. "She looks tired," Aunt Linda whispered. "Well, she works those odd hours," Aunt Sarah replied. "Retail, isn't it? Or admin? She never really finished school, right?" "No," Linda said, lowering her voice. "She dropped out when Marlene got sick, never went back. Such a waste. But honestly, she was never as sharp as Sloane. She is just difficult," Sarah said. "I heard Marlene say she tries to help her, but Nora refuses to take advice. She just shuts down." "Some people like being the victim," Linda agreed. Taking a sip of punch, I stood frozen. The glass in my hand was sweating. Difficult, not as sharp, likes being the victim. This was the narrative my mother had spun. She had taken my sacrifice, the 2 years I gave up to wipe her brow and clean her house, and twisted it into a story about my incompetence. I turned away, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed air. I walked back toward the kitchen, thinking I would check on the pie. Maybe if I cut a slice, just for myself, I would feel better. As I pushed open the kitchen door, I heard my mother's voice. She was speaking to Mrs. Gable, the neighbor. They were standing near the oven. "It must be hard," Mrs. Gable was saying, "having one daughter doing so well, and the other one struggling." "We tried everything," my mother sighed. The sound was theatrical, laden with maternal martyrdom. "We offered to pay for college. We offered to get her tutors. Raymond even tried to get her a job at his firm. She just wouldn't cooperate. She has this chip on her shoulder. She thinks the world owes her something." I stopped. The door was cracked open just an inch. "We offered to pay for college." The lie was so bold, so audacious, that it took my breath away. I remembered the meeting in the study. I remembered my father saying, "What is the point? You are behind." I remembered them telling me there was no money because they were paying for Sloane. "It breaks my heart," my mother continued, "but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. So we just love her as she is, even if she is limited." Limited. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a cable finally giving way under too much tension. I pushed the door open. My mother jumped. Mrs. Gable looked embarrassed. "Nora," my mother said, recovering quickly. "I didn't hear you come in." "I came to get the pie," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "I thought I would slice it for dessert." My mother frowned. She looked at the counter where I had placed the pie. "Oh," she said. "I actually had the caterers move that to the garage fridge. We don't have room for it in here." "The garage?" I repeated. "It is freezing in the garage." "It will keep it fresh," she said. "Besides, we have the tart Sloane brought, and the caterer made a custard dessert. We really don't need the pie. It is a bit rustic for the menu tonight." Rustic. That meant cheap. That meant homemade. That meant Grandma Evelyn. "Grandma Evelyn loved this pie," I said. My mother stiffened. "Well, Grandma Evelyn isn't here, is she?" She turned back to Mrs. Gable. "Now, have you seen the centerpiece? I had the florist fly in the orchids from Holland." I looked at my mother's back. I looked at the closed door to the garage where my offering, my love, my grandmother's legacy, had been banished to the cold next to the lawnmower. I touched the purse on my shoulder. I felt the sharp corner of the envelope through the leather. They had taken my seat. They had taken my name. They had taken my dignity. And now, they had thrown my pie in the garage. The rule I had set for myself, only if they take my seat, had been met. They hadn't just taken the seat, they had burned the chair. "You are right, Mom," I said. She glanced back at me, surprised by my agreement. "Right about what?" "Grandma Evelyn isn't here," I said. I reached into my purse. I unclasped the button. My fingers brushed the cool paper of the envelope. "But she left a message." "What are you mumbling about?" my mother asked, checking her watch. "Dinner is in 5 minutes. Go stand by the buffet and help people find the napkins." "No," I said. My mother turned fully around. "Excuse me?" "I am not going to stand by the buffet," I said. "And I am not eating in the kitchen." I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I walked past the servers. I walked past the beautifully set table with the missing chair. I walked into the living room where Sloane was laughing, where my father was drinking, where the aunts were whispering. I stood in the archway between the dining room and the living room. "Dinner is served," I announced. The room went quiet. Everyone looked at me. Usually, this was the moment I would shrink. This was the moment I would apologize for being too loud. But I wasn't Nora Cook anymore. I was the woman with the envelope, and I was about to serve a course they would never forget. My mother came rushing out of the kitchen, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Nora, what are you doing?" she hissed. I looked at her. I looked at the future legacy card on the table behind me. "I am finding my seat," I said, and then I walked straight to the head of the table. The silence in the dining room was not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a suspension bridge snaps. The groaning of metal, the tension of cables vibrating at a frequency that makes your teeth ache. I was standing at the head of the table, directly behind my father's chair. My hands resting on the back of the mahogany wood. I was holding the pie I had retrieved from the kitchen, the ceramic dish still warm against my palms. My mother, Marlene, had been mid-sentence, extolling the virtues of the imported orchids to Cousin Mike, when she realized I was not standing by the buffet table as instructed. She realized I was standing at the captain's helm of her ship. She stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made Aunt Janine flinch. Marlene's face was flushed, her composure cracking under the pressure of my public defiance. She looked at the guests, then she looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and fury. "Nora," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room, loud enough to be heard over the soft jazz playlist. "I told you clearly, there is no space here." She pointed a manicured finger toward the swinging door of the kitchen. It was a gesture of absolute dismissal, like banishing a dog that had soiled the carpet. "Go to the kitchen," she commanded. "There is no seat for disappointments at this table." There it was, the sentence. She had said it before, in private. She had implied it 1,000 times. But now, she had said it in front of the pastor. She had said it in front of Sloane's in-laws. She had said it in front of the neighbors. She had stripped away the veneer of the loving but troubled dynamic and revealed the ugly, rot-infested core of her parenting. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. Sloane looked down at her plate, her face turning crimson. My father stared into his Scotch glass as if he were trying to drown in it. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not run away, which is what the old Nora would have done. I walked around the side of the table. I moved with a slow, deliberate calmness that felt almost out of body. I approached the spot where my seat should have been, the spot occupied by the For Our Future Legacy card. I placed the pie down. I did not slam it. I set it down with the terrifying gentleness of a bomb disposal technician placing a charge. The ceramic clinked softly against the china charger plate. I looked up. I scanned the faces of the 22 people sitting there. They looked terrified. They were witnessing a car crash, and they couldn't look away. I have spent 34 years, I said, my voice clear and steady, devoid of any tremor, trying to understand what I did wrong. Marlene opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand. It was a sharp, authoritative motion that stopped her cold. I have spent 34 years apologizing, I continued. I apologized for being born. I apologized for taking up space. I apologized for breathing the air in this house. I looked at my mother. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. 10 years ago, I said, addressing the room as if I were reading the minutes of a business meeting, I dropped out of college. I had a 3.8 GPA. I had a scholarship. I walked away from it because Marlene was sick. Nora, stop this, my father whispered. But he didn't look up. I ignored him. For 2 years, I woke up at 5 in the morning. I cooked every meal. I drove to every appointment. I managed the insurance claims. I cleaned the vomit. I washed the sheets. I held her hand while she cried about losing her hair. I turned my gaze to Sloane. She shrank back in her chair. And while I was doing that, I said, Sloane was in Cabo. Sloane was at sorority formals. Sloane was building the legacy while I was keeping the foundation from rotting. And when I asked to go back, when I asked for my turn, I looked at my father. You told me I was behind. You told me there was no point. You told me there was no money, even though you were paying for Sloane's MBA. We did what was best for the family, Marlene shouted. Her voice was shrill, desperate. You are embarrassing yourself. You are drunk. I am stone-cold sober, Mother, I said, and I am not done. I reached into my purse. The leather snapped open. I pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. It looked innocuous, just a piece of stationery, but in that room, it sucked all the oxygen out of the air. I walked over to my father. He looked small. He looked like a man who had been shrinking for decades. I placed the envelope directly onto his dinner plate, covering the hand-painted turkey design. This, I said, this is why you looked through me. This is why you let her erase me. My father looked at the envelope. He saw the handwriting on the front. Grandma Evelyn's handwriting. He flinched as if I had placed a live viper on his chest. Read it, I said. He didn't move. Read it, I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. He didn't touch it, so I did. I ripped the envelope open. The sound of tearing paper was louder than a gunshot in the silent room. I pulled out the DNA test. I pulled out the letter. I held the report up for the table to see. I am not your biological daughter, I stated. The words hung there, vibrating in the crystal glasses. Someone dropped a spoon. It clattered against a porcelain saucer, a sharp ding that punctuated the revelation. Sloane's mouth fell open. What? She breathed. 0% probability, I said, reading from the page. Raymond Cook is not my father. Grandma Evelyn knew. She left me this because she couldn't watch you punish me anymore for a sin I didn't commit. Marlene let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. That is a lie. She is lying. She forged it. She is jealous of the baby, and she is trying to ruin everything. She looked around the table, her eyes wild, seeking allies. Janine, Robert, tell her to stop. She is mentally unstable. But Aunt Janine stood up. Janine was shaking, but she stood tall. She looked at her sister with a mixture of pity and disgust. She is not lying. Marlene, Janine said quietly. Marlene froze. You knew? Evelyn told me, Janine said. She told me before she died. She said she was afraid you would destroy Nora to hide your own secrets. She told me the documents were real. The room turned to my father. Raymond was the only one who could stop this. He was the patriarch. He was the one whose name was on the mailbox. Dad? Sloane asked, her voice trembling. Is it true? Raymond looked up. His eyes were wet. He looked at Marlene, who was staring at him with a terrifying intensity, willing him to lie, willing him to stick to the script they had written 34 years ago, But Raymond was tired. He was so incredibly tired. "I knew," he whispered. The confession hit the table harder than the accusation. "You knew?" I asked. My voice dropped to a whisper. "You knew I wasn't yours?" "I suspected," he said, his voice gaining a little strength, though it was the strength of a man admitting defeat. "Since you were 3, I found a letter. I confronted your mother." He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw the truth in his eyes. It wasn't hatred, it was resentment. It was the resentment of a man who had been forced to raise another man's child to save his reputation. "We made a deal," he said. "We stayed together, for the church, for the business. We agreed never to talk about it. So you sacrificed me instead," I said. "You couldn't look at me because I reminded you of him. So you let her treat me like a servant. You let her take my chair. You let her steal my life because you were too establishing a lie to live in the truth." "I gave you a home," Marlene shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair over. It crashed to the floor. "I gave you a name. I fed you. I clothed you. You ungrateful little brat. I could have sent you to an orphanage. I kept you." "You didn't keep me," I said. "You hid me." "I did it for this family," she yelled, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I did it to keep us together, and this is how you repay me? By humiliating me at my own table?" She looked at Sloane. "Sloane, baby, tell her she is ruining your night. Tell her to get out." Sloane looked at her mother. She looked at the woman who had just admitted to living a lie for 3 decades. She looked at her father, who was broken. Then she looked at me. Sloane didn't speak. She just put her hand over her mouth and sat back down, distancing herself from the woman in the cream dress. Marlene looked around the room. She looked at Mrs. Gable. She looked at the pastor. No one would meet her eye. The allies she had cultivated, the audience she had prepped, had turned into a jury. "You are all against me," Marlene spat. "After everything I do, after how hard I work to make this perfect." I looked at her. She wasn't powerful anymore. She was just a woman standing in the wreckage of her own design. "It wasn't perfect, Mom," I said. "It was painted." I picked up the last piece of paper from the envelope, the photocopy of the birth certificate with the blacked-out name. "I have one question," I said. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "Who is he?" I asked. Marlene wiped her face. Her expression hardened. The mask was gone, but the cruelty remained. It was the only weapon she had left. She laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "You think you want to know," she said, sneering. "You think he is some prince who is going to come and save you? You think he is going to give you the seat I took away?" "Who is he?" I repeated. Marlene leaned forward, placing her hands on the table, leaning over the centerpiece of white pumpkins, her eyes drilled into mine. "If you find out," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom, "you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life." I stared at her. She was bluffing, or she was trying to hurt me one last time. "I will take my chances," I said. I turned to the table. "Enjoy the pie. It is Grandma Evelyn's recipe." I grabbed my purse. I didn't look back at my father. I didn't look back at Sloane. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the hardwood, walking away from the legacy that had never been mine to begin with. The wind outside my parents' house was biting, a sharp November gust that cut right through my silk dress. But I did not feel cold. I felt like I was burning up from the inside out. My skin felt tight. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump of finally detonating the bomb I had been carrying for half a lifetime. I had walked out of the dining room, but halfway to the front door, I had stopped. I had turned back, marched to the table where 22 people sat in stunned silence, and I had picked up the ceramic pie dish. It was petty, it was childish, and it was absolutely necessary. They did not deserve the cinnamon. They did not deserve the walnuts. They did not deserve the time I had spent peeling pears in my small kitchen, thinking about how to please them. So, when I reached my car, I placed the pie on the passenger seat. I buckled the seatbelt around it. It sat there, warm and smelling of spices, a ridiculous co-pilot for my escape. It was not just a dessert anymore. It was a symbol. It was the only thing in that house that was made with genuine love, and I was taking it with me. I was just about to put the key in the ignition when I saw the front door of the house fly open. A figure ran out. It was not my father, coming to beg for forgiveness. It was not my mother, coming to scream more insults. It was Aunt Janine. She wasn't wearing a coat. She was hugging her arms around herself, shivering violently as she ran across the manicured lawn, her heels sinking into the half-frozen grass. "Nora!" she screamed. "Nora, wait!" I hesitated. My instinct was to lock the doors and speed away, to put as many miles between me and Ashford Glen as possible. But Janine had been the only one to stand up. Janine had validated the truth. I rolled down the window halfway. Janine reached the car, breathless, her face flushed. She leaned down, gripping the doorframe. Her eyes were wet. "I thought you were going to drive off." She gasped. "I am," I said. My voice sounded foreign to me, rough and scrapped raw. "I can't be here. Aunt Janine." She nodded rapidly. I know you can't. You shouldn't be here." She reached through the open window. I flinched, expecting her to grab me or try to stop me, but she just found my hand on the steering wheel and squeezed it. Her grip was fierce, desperate. "I just wanted to tell you," she said, her teeth chattering slightly from the cold. "I wanted to tell you that I am proud of you." I looked at her, stunned. Proud? I just ruined Thanksgiving. I just humiliated my mother in front of the pastor. "You didn't break the family." "Nora," Janine said, staring hard into my eyes. She said it with the conviction of a judge delivering a verdict. "The lie broke the family. You just turned on the light so we could finally see the wreckage." I felt a sob rise in my throat, hot and sudden, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't cry yet. If I started crying now, I might never stop. "Thank you," I whispered. "Go," Janine said, patting my hand before pulling back. "Go home. Lock your door. And don't answer the phone. It is going to get ugly before it gets better." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around her shivering frame again. I rolled up the window. I put the car in drive. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror. Janine was still standing there on the lawn, a solitary figure watching me go, while the warm, glowing windows of the house behind her hid a scene of absolute chaos. The fallout was not immediate. It was a slow, creeping toxicity that spread through the family network like a virus. For the first 24 hours, my phone was a paperweight. I had turned it off. I drove back to my apartment, ate 2 slices of the pear pie standing over the kitchen sink, and slept for 12 hours straight. It was the sleep of the dead. It was the sleep of someone who has laid down a heavy burden and doesn't know how to walk without the weight yet. When I turned my phone back on Friday morning, the notifications flooded in so fast the device actually heated up in my hand. There were 43 missed calls, 27 text messages, 11 voicemails. I didn't listen to them all. I didn't need to. I could see the pattern just by scrolling through the names. Cousin Mike, who had watched me be treated like a servant for years, sent a text. "Hey, Nora." That was intense. Just wanted to say, "I always thought Marlene was hard on you. Hope you are okay." Aunt Sarah, one of the women who had called me difficult near the punch bowl, sent a long, rambling paragraph. "Nora, honey, I am so shocked. We had no idea. If we had known, we would have never let her speak to you that way. Please call me when you can. We are all very worried about your mental state." It was fascinating. They were rewriting history in real time. Suddenly, they were the compassionate bystanders. Suddenly, they had always known something was wrong. They weren't apologizing for their complicity. They were just trying to position themselves on the right side of the drama now that the power dynamic had shifted. I didn't reply to a single one of them. The news about my parents came through Aunt Janine, who texted me on Saturday. Raymond is staying at the Marriott off the highway. She wrote, "He left that night. He told Marlene he couldn't stay in the house with the ghost of the lie anymore. She is telling everyone it is a temporary break for health reasons. But he took his golf clubs and his files. I think he is done. Nora." I stared at the screen. My father, the man who had chosen comfort over his daughter for 3 decades, had finally found a spine. Or maybe he just couldn't handle the glare of the spotlight I had shone on him. Either way, the house in Ashford Glen was fracturing. Marlene, of course, went on the offensive. I heard from a friend of a friend that my mother was telling people I had suffered a psychotic break. She was telling the neighbors that I had forged the documents, that I was jealous of Sloane's pregnancy, and that I had ruined the holiday to get attention. She was clinging to her denial like a life raft. If she admitted I was telling the truth, she would have to admit she was a villain, and Marlene Cook does not play the villain. She is always the martyr. And then there was Sloane. My sister called me 6 times on Saturday. When I didn't answer, she started leaving voice notes. I played one of them while I was drinking my morning coffee. "Nora, pick up. This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea what you did?" Brad's parents left early. They were horrified. This was supposed to be my night. It was supposed to be about the baby, and you made it about whatever that was. Just call me. I am willing to hear you out, but you need to stop making me uncomfortable. I am pregnant. Nora, stress is bad for the baby. I deleted the message halfway through. Stop making me uncomfortable. That was the summary of our relationship. My pain was only relevant insofar as it inconvenienced her. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about the DNA test. She didn't ask about the fact that her father wasn't my father. She only cared that her audience had been distracted. I made a decision right then. I went into my contact settings. Marlene Cook, blocked. Raymond Cook, blocked. Sloane Cook, blocked. It felt like cutting off a gangrenous limb. It hurt, but I knew it was the only way to survive. I wasn't doing it to punish them. I was doing it because I had nothing left to say. I had said it all in the dining room. I spent the rest of the weekend in a strange state of calm. I cleaned my apartment. I threw away the old photos I kept in a shoebox. Photos of family vacations where I was always standing on the edge of the frame, half cut off. I made space. On Monday morning, I woke up with a new objective, the trust fund. I had the documents. I had the money. Grandma Evelyn had given me the means to fix the mistake of 10 years ago. I drove to the local community college. I didn't have to ask for permission. I didn't have to ask my father if it was worth the point. I walked into the admissions office, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor. I sat down with a counselor, a woman with kind eyes and messy hair. "I want to finish my degree," I told her. She pulled up my old transcripts on the computer. She raised her eyebrows. "You have excellent credits here," she said. "You were on the dean's list every semester before you withdrew. You are very close to a degree in business administration. Why did you stop?" I looked at the screen, at the record of the girl I used to be. The girl who had a 5-year plan. Life got in the way. I said, "But I'm taking it back now." I registered for 3 night classes starting in January: management, business law, and advanced accounting. I wrote the check for the tuition using the account Grandma Evelyn had set up. As I handed it over, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't behind. I was just on a detour. But the real test came when I went to work. I worked at a company called Kestrel Point Risk Compliance. It was a mid-sized firm, corporate and beige. I was an administrative assistant. My job was to schedule meetings, order lunch for the executives, and ensure the printer always had toner. I was good at it because I had been trained by my family to anticipate the needs of others and make myself invisible. I walked into the office on Tuesday morning. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was standing by my desk, looking at his watch. "You are late," he said. I looked at the clock. It was 9:02. "I am 2 minutes late," I said. "Mr." Henderson frowned. He was a man who measured his worth by his adherence to schedules. Usually. I would have apologized profusely. I would have made up an excuse about traffic. I would have groveled. Today, I just put my purse in the drawer. I need to talk to you. Mr. Henderson, I said. He looked surprised. He gestured to his office. We sat down. He looked at me over his spectacles. Is everything all right? Nora, you seem different. I am different. I said, I wanted to let you know that I have enrolled in night classes to finish my degree in business management. I am interested in moving out of administration. I want to be considered for the junior analyst track. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. He laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. Exactly. It was a dismissive chuckle. The kind of laugh you give a child who says they want to be an astronaut. Nora, he said, smiling benevolently, let's not get ahead of ourselves. You are fantastic at what you do. You are the best assistant I have ever had. You are so steady, dependable, the background. Why would you want the stress of an analyst position? He asked. Honestly, I thought you were happy here. I thought you didn't want more. You never struck me as the ambitious type. The words hit me like a slap. I thought you didn't want more. He didn't see me as incapable. He saw me as unwilling. He saw the persona I had adopted to survive my family, the quiet, accommodating, non-threatening Nora, and he assumed that was all I was. I had projected smallness so effectively that the world had agreed to keep me small. I looked at him. I was wrong. I said, and you were wrong. I do want more. Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. Well, we can discuss it when you have the degree, but for now, I need you to order catering for the Thursday lunch. I stood up. I will order the lunch. I said, but get used to the idea. Mr. Henderson, I am not going to be answering the phones forever. I walked out of his office. My heart was pounding again, but it was a good pounding. It was the engine revving up. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the file from Grandma Evelyn. I had handled the letter. I had handled the trust. I had handled the DNA test. There was only one thing left, the torn photograph of the hand with the ring, and the name, Elliot Shaw. I had Googled him, of course. There were a few Elliot Shaws in the state, but one of them lived in a town called Oakhaven, about 40 miles away. He was 61 years old. He had no social media presence, no family photos, just a public record of a retired address. I had found a phone number. It was a landline. I stared at the number written on a sticky note, 555-0199. I picked up my phone. I dialed the first 3 digits. My thumb hovered over the next number. If I called him, I was opening a door I couldn't close. If I called him, I was admitting that I needed to know. My mother's voice echoed in my head. If you find out, you will regret it. But my mother was a liar. And Grandma Evelyn had left me this breadcrumb for a reason. When you are ready to stop begging, I wasn't begging anymore. I was hunting. I didn't press the call button. Not yet. I saved the number into my contacts under the name The Truth. I put the phone down. I picked up my textbook for the class that hadn't even started yet. I opened to page 1. The investigation into Elliot Shaw could wait one more day. Tonight, I had to study. I had a lot of catching up to do. I finally dialed the number I had saved as The Truth. It was Tuesday evening, a week after the Thanksgiving disaster. The winter wind was rattling the loose frame of my kitchen window. A sound that usually made me feel lonely, but tonight it just sounded like background noise to my mission. The woman who answered the phone had a voice like sandpaper and honey. Her name was Paige Linden. She was a forensic genealogist, a title that sounded clinical but, as I soon learned, meant she was a detective of broken bloodlines. When I introduced myself as Evelyn Hart's granddaughter, the line went silent for a long moment. I have been wondering when you would call, Paige said. Her tone wasn't surprised. It was relieved. You knew she left me your number? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. She hired me 8 months ago. Nora, Paige said, we were working on this case right up until the week she passed. She didn't just leave you a name, she left you a map. We were already halfway down the road. I sat down at my kitchen table, my legs suddenly feeling like water. Grandma Evelyn hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. She had been actively trying to solve the puzzle of my existence before she ran out of time. Paige explained that the initials E.S. and the torn photograph were not vague clues. They were confirmations. Grandma Evelyn had hired Paige to run a background check, to trace the movement of a specific man who had been in my mother's orbit 35 years ago. His name is Elliot Shaw, Paige said. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. He is 61 years old. He is a retired structural engineer. And Nora? He lives 20 minutes away from you. 20 minutes. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. For 34 years, I had lived in a house where I felt like an alien, while my biological father was potentially buying groceries at the same supermarket as me. He is quiet, Paige continued, reading from her file. No social media. No criminal record. He pays his taxes on time. He drives a 10-year-old truck. He was married once, briefly, in the 80s. No other children listed. No other children. Just me. The secret he presumably didn't know existed. Does he know, I asked? Does he know about me? That was the part we were working on when Evelyn died. Paige said, we hadn't made contact yet. We needed to be sure, but the timeline matches, the location matches, and Nora, I have seen a photo of him from his 30s. You have his chin. I touched my face involuntarily. My chin. The part of my face my mother used to criticize for being too stubborn. Paige promised to send me the full dossier by the morning. But before she hung up, her voice grew serious. There is something else you need to know. Nora, she said, in the course of monitoring your grandmother's estate, which I do because I like the woman, not because I am paid to, I noticed some activity regarding the trust fund. My stomach tightened. Activity? Your mother has been making inquiries. Paige said, her lawyers are trying to file a motion. They are arguing that the trust undermines family unity and that Evelyn was not of sound mind when she excluded Marlene from the oversight committee. They are trying to create a consortium of consent. A consortium of consent. It sounded like legal jargon for, we want control. They can't break the trust. Can they? I asked. Not easily. Paige said, it is ironclad, but they can freeze it. They can tie it up in litigation for years so you can't access the tuition money. Unless what? Unless they get the beneficiary to sign a waiver. Paige said, if you sign a document agreeing to move the funds into a joint family pot for investment purposes, the bank will allow it. They need your signature. Nora, without it, they are locked out. I hung up the phone feeling a new kind of nausea. It wasn't the sick feeling of rejection. It was the sick feeling of being targeted. My mother wasn't just mad that I had humiliated her. She was furious that I had money she couldn't touch. To Marlene Cook, money was control. If I had my own funding, I had my own freedom. And that was the one thing she could not abide. Paige had warned me before we disconnected. She told me to watch out for the pivot. Narcissists do not give up power, she had said. When intimidation fails, they switch to seduction. They will try to charm you back into the cage. Watch for the sudden warmth. Watch for the olive branch that has a hook in it. She was right. The hook arrived on Wednesday morning. My phone buzzed with a text message. I looked at the screen, expecting another spam notification. It was Marlene. Nora, I have been doing a lot of praying. The other night was difficult for all of us, but we are a family. We cannot let one bad dinner destroy 30 years of love. I want to understand. I want to listen. Please come over for coffee on Friday. Just us. No yelling. Just a mother and daughter talking. I miss you. I stared at the words. I miss you. She had never texted me I miss you in my entire life. She texted me commands. She texted me critiques. She texted me grocery lists. But now, suddenly, after I had exposed her deepest lie, she missed me? If I hadn't spoken to Paige, I might have fallen for it, the little girl inside me. The one who was desperate for approval. Wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that the truth had finally broken through the ice and that my mother was ready to love me. But the adult Nora, the one studying business law, saw the strategy. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to get me in the room. She wanted to separate me from my defenses. 2 hours later, the second pincer of the trap closed in. Sloane texted, "Hey, sis, look, I know Mom is crazy sometimes. I am sorry about the kitchen thing. That was messed up. But she is really torn up about this. And honestly, I need you. The baby shower is coming up, and I can't do it without my big sister. I want you to be a good aunt to little Raymond. Mom says she just wants to smooth things over so we can move forward. She mentioned there is some paperwork for Grandma's estate that needs to be tidied up so we don't get hit with taxes. If you come over Friday, we can just sign the boring stuff and then order takeout? Please. For me?" I read the message twice. There it was, buried under the guilt trip about being a good aunt, and the fake sisterly bonding was the payload. Paperwork, tidied up, boring stuff. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was still the Nora who dropped out of college to be a nursemaid. They thought I didn't read the fine print. They thought they could dangle the carrot of family unity, and I would sign away my freedom just to get a bite. I walked to my window and looked out at the parking lot of my apartment complex. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted a signature. They wanted to strip me of the one thing Grandma Evelyn had given me to ensure my independence. I typed a reply to Sloane. I didn't send it. I just typed it to get it out of my system. I am not signing the trust over. Sloane, and I am not going to be an aunt to a child named after a coward. I deleted it. Silence was a better weapon. Let them sweat. Let them wonder if I was coming. I went back to my desk and opened the file Paige had sent me via secure email. There he was, Elliot Shaw. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance, perhaps at a gas station or a hardware store. He was tall, with broad shoulders that were starting to stoop. He had gray hair, thinning at the temples. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans. I zoomed in on his face. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had lived a quiet life, but the eyes, even in the grainy photo, I saw the shape. They were almond-shaped, slightly downturned at the corners. My eyes. I pulled up a mirror and held it next to the screen. The nose was different. I had my mother's nose, but the chin, the jawline, and the eyes were undeniable. This stranger carried the code that had made me. I spent the next 2 days in a state of high anxiety. I attended my work meetings. I ordered the catering for Mr. Henderson, but my mind was in Oakhaven. I was living 2 lives. In one, I was an admin assistant. In the other, I was a player in a high-stakes family drama. Thursday afternoon. Paige called me again. Her voice was urgent. "Nora," she said, "I have an update. Did you find more on Elliot?" I asked. "Better," she said, "or maybe more complicated. I have a contact in the Oakhaven clerk's office. Small towns talk. Nora, apparently, there has been some chatter. Someone has been asking questions about Elliot Shaw." "My mother?" I asked, my blood running cold. "No," Paige said, "not your mother. It seems Elliot Shaw has been asking questions about you." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "My source says Elliot was seen at the library, using the public computer to search for Cook family Ashford Glen. He has been asking around about a Thanksgiving incident. The gossip from your dinner didn't just stay in the neighborhood. Nora, the caterers talked, the neighbors talked. The story of the illegitimate daughter who blew up the legacy dinner has traveled. He knows," I whispered. "He knows something." Paige corrected. "He knows there is a woman named Nora Cook who claims her father isn't her father. And he knows he has a history with Marlene Cook. He is putting the pieces together." My heart hammered against my ribs. If he knows, why hasn't he called? Maybe he's scared. Paige said, "Maybe he thinks he is the villain in your story. Or maybe he is waiting for an invitation." I hung up and sat on my sofa. The silence of the apartment felt heavy, charged with static. He was looking for me. The ghost was looking back. I thought about the Friday summit my mother had proposed. If I went, I would be walking into an ambush. They would have the papers ready. They would have the tears ready. They would corner me. But if I didn't go, they would keep coming. They would sue. They would harass. I needed to end this, but I couldn't do it alone. And I certainly wasn't going to sign their papers. I looked at the clock. It was 7 p.m. My phone buzzed again. I jumped. I expected another text from Marlene, asking if I was bringing coffee cake. I expected a text from Sloan, sending a photo of an ultrasound to manipulate me, but the number on the screen was unfamiliar. It wasn't saved in my contacts. It had a local area code. The area code for Oakhaven. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the notification bubble. Hello, Nora. I don't know if this is welcome, but I recently learned something that has kept me awake for 3 nights. I think we need to speak. Not about the past, but about the chair you deserved. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to see the signature to know who it was. The trap at my mother's house was set for Friday, but the reinforcements had just arrived on Thursday night. I looked at the trust documents. I looked at the text. I wasn't going to go to my mother's house to surrender. I was going to go to declare victory. But this time, I wouldn't be the only one sitting on the side of the truth. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I am ready. I thought. Friday arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. It was the kind of day that usually made me want to curl up under a blanket, but as I pulled my car up to my parents' house, I felt a strange, vibrating energy in my chest. I was not alone this time. Sitting in the passenger seat, looking determined and clutching a travel mug of tea, was Aunt Janine. She was my witness. She was my insurance policy. I had told my mother I was coming alone, but the days of following Marlene Cook's instructions were over. We walked up the driveway together. The house looked the same. Perfect landscaping, aggressive wreath. But it felt different. It felt like a stage set where the actors had forgotten their lines. I opened the door. My mother and Sloan were waiting in the living room. They had set the scene with terrifying precision. There was a pot of coffee on the low table, a plate of croissants that looked untouched, and soft instrumental music playing in the background. My mother was wearing a soft pink cardigan, a color designed to signal vulnerability. Her eyes were rimmed with red, likely enhanced with a little strategic rubbing before I arrived. Sloan sat next to her, looking like the dutiful, concerned daughter, her hands resting on her baby bump. When they saw Janine, the atmosphere curdled instantly. "Janine," my mother said, her voice tight. "I thought this was a private family discussion." "I am family," Janine said, sitting down in the armchair without being invited. "And Nora asked me to come, so I am here." My mother's jaw worked, but she forced a smile. "Fine, of course. Sit down, Nora." She gestured to the spot on the sofa opposite them. I sat. I didn't take off my coat. "Nora," my mother began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I want to apologize for the other night. Emotions were high. I said things I didn't mean. I want us to be a family again. I want to fix this." Sloan nodded vigorously. "We just want you back. Nora, it feels wrong without you. I need my sister." I watched them perform. It was a good performance. If I hadn't spent 34 years memorizing their script, I might have applauded. "I am listening," I said calmly. My mother reached for a manila folder on the table. She slid it toward me across the polished wood. "To move forward," she said, "we need to clear up the confusion Grandma Evelyn left behind. Her lawyers made a mess of the estate planning. It is causing tax issues that could hurt everyone, including the baby's future fund." "Just some boring legal stuff," Sloan chimed in, waving a hand dismissively. "We all have to sign waivers. I signed one this morning. It just consolidates everything so Mom can manage it without the courts taking a cut." I looked at the folder. Consolidates everything. I opened it. Inside was a document titled Family Asset Unification Agreement. It was thick with legal jargon, printed in small font designed to make your eyes glaze over. I flipped to page 3. I found the clause Paige had warned me about. The undersigned beneficiary hereby waives all independent claim to the Evelyn Hart Educational Trust and grants full power of attorney regarding said funds to the executor, Marlene Cook, for the purpose of familial investment. I looked up. My mother was watching me, her breath held. Sloane was watching me, her smile fixed and brittle. "You want me to sign over the trust?" I said. It wasn't a question. "It is for the family," my mother said quickly. "We will invest it. We will make sure you are taken care of. But you know you are not good with money. Nora, you never finished your degree. You need guidance." "Guidance," I repeated. I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The audio file I had saved from a voicemail my mother had left me 3 years ago played into the quiet room. It was from a time I had asked for a small loan to fix my car so I could get to work. "Nora, grow up. Adults handle their own problems. I am not a bank. Figure it out." I stopped the recording. Then I played the memory from Thanksgiving, speaking the words out loud. "There is no seat for disappointments," I said. "Adults first." My mother flinched as if I had thrown hot coffee in her face. "You don't want peace, Mom," I said, sliding the folder back toward her. "You want control. You want the money Grandma left me because you can't stand the idea that I might succeed without you." "That is not true," Sloane cried. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" "I am not being difficult," I said. "I am being an adult, and adults read the fine print." I stood up. "I am not signing it. The trust stays with me. The tuition stays with me. And my life stays with me." My mother's face changed. The soft, pink, vulnerable mask dissolved. In its place was the hard, cold granite I knew so well. She stood up, knocking the coffee table with her knee. "You owe me," she screamed. "I raised you. I kept you when I should have given you away. You are nothing without this family. You are a mistake I fixed." "I don't owe you my future," I said, my voice steady. "You fixed a mistake by creating a tragedy, but the tragedy is over." I reached into my purse one last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a letter from Conrad Hale, on his official letterhead. I placed it on the table, right on top of their fraudulent waiver. "This is from my lawyer," I said. "It states that the Evelyn Hart Trust is irrevocable. It also states that any further attempts to coerce the beneficiary into signing over rights will be met with a harassment lawsuit, and Aunt Janine is here to witness that you just attempted coercion." My mother looked at the letter. She looked at Janine, who crossed her arms and nodded grimly. She looked at me, and for the first time, she looked small. She realized she had no leverage left, no guilt, no money, no love to withhold because I no longer wanted it. "Come on, Aunt Janine," I said. "Let's go." We walked out. We didn't look back. I heard Sloane start to cry, a high, thin sound of frustration, but I didn't turn around. I walked out of that house and I knew, in my bones, I would never walk back in. But the day wasn't over. I dropped Janine off at her car. She hugged me tight, holding me for a long time. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "I had to," I said, after she left. I sat in my car for a moment. I looked at my phone. I had one more appointment. I drove to a small coffee shop on the edge of Oakhaven, a place called the Roasted Bean. It was quiet, smelling of dark roast and old books. I saw him immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, staring into a black coffee. He looked exactly like the photo, but older, softer. He wore a clean flannel shirt and a nervous expression. I walked over. My legs felt heavy. "Elliot?" I asked. He looked up. When his eyes met mine, the breath left his body. He stood up. Knocking the table slightly, he looked at my face. Really looked at it. Scanning the chin, the eyes, the brow. "Nora," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel. "My God, you are real." I sat down. "I am real." He sat down opposite me. He didn't try to touch me. He kept his hands clasped on the table. as if he was afraid he might break the moment. "I didn't know," he said. "You have to believe me. Marlene, we were young. It was brief. She told me she was going back to Raymond. She never told me there was a baby. If I had known—" He choked up. He looked away, blinking rapidly. "If I had known, I would have fought for you. I would have never let you think you didn't have a seat." I looked at him. I saw the pain in his face. It wasn't the performative pain of my mother. It was the raw, deep ache of 34 years of missed time. "I believe you," I said, and I did. He reached into his pocket. "I don't have money, Nora. I am a retired engineer. I live simply. I can't give you a trust fund like your grandmother did." "I don't need money," I said. "But I have this," he said. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age. "Your grandmother, Evelyn," he said. "She came to me about 6 months ago, before she died. She found me. She told me about you. She told me she was setting things up for you to escape, but she made me promise not to interfere until you came to me. She said you had to be the one to open the door." He handed me the paper. "She left this for me, to give to you." I opened it. It was Grandma Evelyn's handwriting. "Elliot, if you are reading this, Nora has found you. That means she has finally walked away from the table that starved her. I know you will want to make up for lost time. I know you will want to fix the past, but you can't. The past is gone. Don't try to be the father she missed. Just be the friend she needs. Don't try to fix the old table. Just give her a chair in the present. Take care of her. She is the best of all of us. Evelyn." I read the note. Tears finally fell. Hot, cleansing tears that washed away the last of the disappointment. Elliot watched me. He pushed a napkin across the table. "I have a wood shop," he said quietly. "In my garage, I make furniture, mostly chairs, tables." He smiled, a tentative, hopeful smile. Maybe you could come by sometime. I could show you how to build one." I looked at him. I saw my eyes in his face. I saw a future that wasn't about debt or obligation, but about connection. "I would like that," I said. "I would like that very much." That evening, I went back to my apartment. It was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. I had stopped at a furniture store on the way home. I walked into my small dining area. There was a small, round table there. I took the delivery box and opened it. I assembled it right there on the rug. It was a chair, a solid oak chair with a comfortable cushion. I placed it at the table. Then I called Aunt Janine. "What are you doing for dinner?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "Why?" "Come over," I said. I am making pasta, and I have a new seat for you." I hung up. I looked at the table. It wasn't a grand banquet table. It didn't have crystal or gold-threaded linens, but it was mine. I had paid for the food. I had paid for the chairs. I had fought for the peace that filled the room. My mother was right about one thing. There was no seat for disappointments, but she was wrong about who the disappointment was. I sat down in my new chair. It was sturdy. It held me up. "Turns out," I whispered to the empty room, channeling Grandma Evelyn one last time, "the only table that matters is the one I build." I smiled. And for the first time in 34 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to Nora's story and walking this road to justice with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far this family reaches. If you enjoyed this story of reclaiming your power, please subscribe to the Lucy Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the like button to help us share this message with everyone who needs to hear it.